23 hours alone. The truth about solitary confinement. In the high desert plains of Colorado, south of the small town of Florence, sits a structure designed for a singular, chilling purpose: to erase a human being from the world. This isn't just a prison. This is the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, or ADX Florence. It is America's only federal Supermax prison, a modern-day fortress built to hold the people our society deems the most dangerous criminals in the world. Commonly known as the Alcatraz of the Rockies, this facility takes the concept of imprisonment to an unimaginable extreme. It was built in 1994, not just to confine, but to isolate, not just to punish, but to achieve total control through sensory deprivation and solitude. But what happens when you lock a person in a concrete box for 23 hours a day? What is the truth of a life lived in near total silence? And what becomes of the mind when it's left with nothing but its own thoughts, year after year? Today, we journey inside the impenetrable walls of ADX Florence. We will explore the architecture of control, meet the infamous inmates who call this place home, and confront the harrowing reality of what it means to be buried alive. This is the story of ADX Florence and the brutal truth about solitary confinement. To understand ADX Florence, you must first understand why it was built. In the 1980s, the federal prison system faced a crisis. At the maximum security prison in Marion, Illinois, a wave of violence culminated in the separate murders of 2 correctional officers by inmates. One of those inmates, Thomas Silverstein, would go on to become a symbol of the system's struggle to control its most violent individuals. These events convinced the Bureau of Prisons that a new type of facility was needed, one where inmates could be held in no human contact conditions, a place from which escape was not just improbable, but impossible. The result was ADX Florence, opened in 1994 in the remote landscape of Fremont County, Colorado. Its official name is the United States Penitentiary Administrative Maximum Facility, but it's more accurately described as the nation's sole federal Supermax. Its very purpose is to incapacitate, holding inmates considered too violent, too disruptive, or too high-profile for even a maximum security prison. The prison currently houses around 357 male inmates, though it was designed for more. A staggering 95% of them are not sent here directly, but are transferred from other prisons due to histories of extreme violence. This isn't a place for first offenses, it's the end of the line. Because of its extreme and unyielding conditions, ADX has become a focal point in the contentious debate about human rights and the psychological price of solitary confinement. The prison's philosophy was perhaps best summarized by a man who once ran it, former Warden Robert Hood, who famously told the New York Times, "This place is not designed for humanity." He later described it as a clean version of hell. An escape-proof fortress. Since the day it opened its doors, not a single person has ever escaped from ADX Florence. This perfect record is no accident. It is the result of a deliberate and multi-layered security strategy built on 2 core principles: overwhelming physical barriers and profound psychological disorientation. The compound itself is a 37-acre fortress, bristling with technology. A network of motion detectors and pressure pads creates an invisible web of security. The perimeter is guarded by 12-foot-high razor-wire fences and watched over by heavily armed officers in towers. Internally, the prison is a labyrinth of 1,400 remote-controlled steel doors, a multitude of cameras, and an underground tunnel system that allows staff to move without ever coming into contact with inmates. The very architecture is designed to be disorienting. Cells have windows that show only a sliver of the sky, preventing inmates from ever knowing their location within the complex. The effectiveness of this design is best illustrated by the inmates it contains. Famous escape artists have seen their legends die within these walls. Joaquin El Chapo Guzman, the former billionaire leader of the Sinaloa cartel, was infamous for his dramatic escapes from 2 different maximum security prisons in Mexico. His ability to corrupt, tunnel, and fight his way to freedom made him a folk hero. But after his final capture and sentencing to life plus 30 years, he was transferred to ADX in 2019. His history of escaping and his vast resources were no match for the fortress. He has not escaped from ADX. He resides in Range 13, the most restrictive and isolated unit in the entire prison. 23 hours of solitary confinement. ADX Florence is the only prison in the United States specifically engineered to keep every person inside in a state of near-total solitary confinement. For 23 hours a day, inmates are locked inside a cell measuring just 7 by 12 feet, smaller than a standard parking spot. The cell is a world made of concrete. The furniture is limited to a desk, a stool, and a bed, all constructed from poured concrete and bolted to the floor, making them impossible to move or weaponize. Every detail is designed for control. The toilet is combined with a sink and shuts off if an inmate tries to plug it. The shower is on a timer to prevent flooding. A single, 4-inch-wide slit serves as the only window, angled upward, so that inmates can see nothing of the surrounding landscape or other parts of the prison, only a sliver of the sky. There is no communal dining. Food is delivered by guards and pushed through a small slot in the solid steel door. This isolation is absolute. For the first 3 years of their sentence, prisoners are forbidden from coming into contact with other inmates at any time. The silence is profound, broken only by the clang of a food slot or distant, muffled sounds. The 1 hour that inmates are allowed out of their cells is for recreation. They are escorted, often in restraints, to another concrete cell. Some call it the empty swimming pool, a concrete pit with high walls that are open to the sky. Here, they remain alone. There is no equipment, no interaction, nothing to do but walk in circles in a cage barely large enough for 10 paces in a straight line. It is simply a different, slightly larger, concrete box. The psychological breakdown. What happens to the human mind when it is sealed in a concrete tomb for years on end? The conditions at ADX are known to cause devastating psychological effects, a process of mental and emotional erosion that experts sometimes call SHU syndrome. Locked away with nothing but their own thoughts, inmates often develop severe anxiety, paranoia, and panic attacks. The sensory deprivation makes them hypersensitive to the slightest stimuli. The sound of footsteps or a flushing toilet can become unbearable. Cognitive function deteriorates. Inmates report difficulty with concentration, memory, and coherent thought. As the months turn into years, more severe symptoms can emerge, including vivid hallucinations affecting all 5 senses, paranoia, and complete detachment from reality. One former inmate grimly recalled, "I would watch guys come to prison totally sane, and in 3 years they don't live in the real world anymore." This mental collapse often leads to disturbing behaviors. Some inmates smear feces on their cell walls or engage in endless, nonsensical screaming. Acts of self-mutilation are horrifyingly common, as men cut themselves with any object they can find, simply to feel something real or as a desperate cry for human contact. A class action lawsuit filed against the Bureau of Prisons detailed numerous incidents of inmates mutilating their own bodies. Unsurprisingly, suicide rates for inmates in solitary confinement are dramatically higher than in the general prison population. For many, the slow-motion burial of the mind is a fate worse than death itself. It holds many high-profile inmates. As a facility purpose-built for the worst of the worst, ADX Florence has become a household name by holding some of the most infamous criminals in recent history. It serves as a primary holding facility for convicted domestic and international terrorists. Its roster includes Dzhokhar Tsarnaev, the Boston Marathon bomber who, with his brother, killed 3 people and injured hundreds in 2013. Also here is Zacarias Moussaoui, the so-called 20th hijacker, convicted for his role in the 9/11 conspiracy. Then there are spies like Robert Hansen, a former senior FBI agent who spent 2 decades selling America's most sensitive secrets to the Soviet Union and Russia, an act the Department of Justice called possibly the worst intelligence disaster in U.S. history. And of course, the cartel kingpin, El Chapo Guzman. But one of the most significant residents was Thomas Silverstein, often called the most isolated man in America. A convicted murderer and leader of the Aryan Brotherhood, Silverstein killed a corrections officer at USP Marion in 1983. This act was a key catalyst in the push to create ADX. He was placed under a no human contact order and spent 36 years in solitary confinement until his death in 2019. one of the longest stretches in federal history. Silverstein himself, who became an artist and writer in his isolation, once said, "It's almost more humane to kill someone immediately than it is to intentionally bury a man alive." However, it's crucial to remember that the majority of inmates at ADX are not high-profile terrorists. They are prisoners transferred from other facilities due to extensive histories of violence within the prison system itself. The cruel and unusual debate. The extreme conditions at ADX Florence exist in a gray area of American and international law. The Eighth Amendment to the U.S. Constitution prohibits the government from imposing cruel and unusual punishments. The central question is, where's the line? And does 23-hour-a-day isolation for years on end cross it? Internationally, the standards are clearer. The United Nations Nelson Mandela Rules, a revised set of minimum standards for the treatment of prisoners, are explicit. They define solitary confinement as being confined for 22 or more hours a day without meaningful human contact. They state that prolonged solitary confinement, defined as anything more than 15 consecutive days, is a form of torture and is prohibited. At ADX, inmates spend a minimum of 1 year in these conditions before they can even be considered for reduced restrictions, and the average time spent in solitary is over 8 years. Organizations like Amnesty International have condemned the conditions at ADX, stating that they breach international law. This debate came to a head in a landmark class action lawsuit, Baycoat versus Federal Bureau of Prisons. The suit alleged that ADX was knowingly housing dozens of prisoners with serious mental illnesses, a direct violation of the Bureau of Prisons' own policies. The lawsuit described a vicious cycle. An inmate's pre-existing mental illness was severely worsened by the extreme isolation. Their resulting erratic behavior was then punished with even more isolation and harsher restrictions, and their mental state would spiral downward catastrophically. As a result of the legal challenges, some changes were made. Severely mentally ill inmates were transferred out, and the prison was forced to institute a step-down program. This program is designed to create a pathway for inmates to slowly earn their way into less restrictive environments by demonstrating clear conduct over long periods. The problem with Supermax prisons. While some of the men held in Supermax prisons will serve life sentences or die behind bars, a fact that may surprise many is that the overwhelming majority of these prisoners are eventually released back into society. This stark reality means that what happens inside the concrete walls of ADX Florence does not stay there. It can have a direct impact on the safety of everyday Americans. Studies and anecdotal evidence have shown that individuals released directly from long-term solitary confinement may have higher rates of reoffending. They are often released with untreated psychological trauma, measurable cognitive damage, and a profound inability to function in a normal social world. After years of sensory deprivation, the noise and chaos of a city street can be terrifying. One former inmate who spent 20 years in solitary described the sheer terror he felt just having a cellmate again, realizing that years of isolation had completely rewired his mind. James Daly, who spent 24 years in isolation before being released, now works as a youth mentor. He has described the men released from such conditions as potential ticking time bombs. The very system designed to ensure public safety may, in fact, be releasing individuals who have been psychologically broken, made more volatile, and less able to cope with society than when they first went in. The question we are left with is a difficult one. Does a system that buries people alive truly solve a problem? Or does it merely postpone it, creating a more dangerous individual in the process? Do share with us in the comments your thoughts on this prison. Is a place like ADX Florence a necessary evil in the fight against crime? Or is it a fundamental violation of human rights? Where should society draw the line between punishment and torture? Please subscribe for more deep dives. Thanks for watching.